absolutely. So I guess final couple of minutes, what are your sort of thoughts now? We were talking a little bit before we started. Joe Biden, Keir Starmer, the standard bearers now from instead of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. What does that represent? And what are the sort of broader responses to it? I mean, look, I think obviously in the United States, I make no secret, I think it would be very much better if Joe Biden was president versus Donald Trump. I think there's a number of reasons for that, but obviously that doesn't represent any sort of left victory whatsoever.
I would agree. I think Keir Starmer would be much better than Boris Johnson. I'm a member of the Labour Party. If an election, which it won't be, but if an election was to be called at any stage soon, I would be out there campaigning to try to make Keir Starmer Prime Minister. But I agree with the fundamental point that you raised, which is that it doesn't necessarily mean much for the left. Insofar as I see it, what we have in both countries is a very similar response to the kind of rising left and this rise of the populist right. You've now got centrist, middle-of-the-road figures who are trying to present themselves as a safer pair of hands. I think Starmer is much more competent at it, much better at it than Joe Biden is. And I think he'll be a more viable candidate going forward. But both of them are fundamentally responding to the turmoil of the last few years with political messages that say, you can trust us, we're a safer pair of hands. Both of them operate on a kind of, with a bit of nostalgia there as well, nostalgia for the status quo ante before the populist right kind of grew. So Biden obviously has the Obama link, but Starmer as well, because of his involvement with the Remain campaign and this idea, the ideas that were really so strong line before 2016 and the Brexit vote, and that just created this kind of chaos. The Brexit vote itself created a chaos from which it was very difficult for us to return. So I think both of them operate around a kind of a nostalgia for the recent past. Both of them are saying fundamentally that what they are is a safe pair of hands after the years of turmoil with the populist right and with the rise of the socialist left. And they're saying, you can trust us to manage this, run this ship and so forth. And they're putting forward much more moderate proposals, but also their whole way of dealing with politics. They're returning to some of, the discourse that was there beforehand, where it's all about kind of, let's find the middle here between these two forces. Let's be reasonable, responsible, or what Starmer, the term he uses, sensible opposition and so on. And I think in one sense, it might work. Electorally, in the short term, I can see a path where one or both of them win. The problem is, even if they do win, it's of very little use for the left. It's better than the populist right being in power, no question about that, but it's of very little use for the goals that we have about fundamental structural change, because you can't really do much about fundamental structural change to society if you've won on the basis of, I'm a safe pair of hands who's going to go back to how things were just before the populist right got into power. And, you can trust me not to cause too much disruption to your economy. That message doesn't work with fundamental structural change. And I also think, and this is my perspective on the coming decade, I think it's going to be quite hot. I think we're going to start it with a historic recession. The political disintegration that we've seen over recent years doesn't really show any sign of stopping. I think that even if there's a kind of temporary period where there's some respite for the political centre, that they'll soon find that the underlying economic conditions that created the rise of the left and the rise of the populist right are still there. And, if they try to pursue too much of a middle road, a middle ground through all this, I think they'll melt with the heat of the political situation. I think even if they got into power and they tried to sit in the middle of the road, that they would very swiftly find that the economy you can only really govern as a centrist in periods of high growth with quite widespread popularity in terms of the economy, people quite satisfied with their positions. You can't govern as a centrist in a period of tremendous economic disruption, huge numbers of people deeply unhappy with the economic situation, large levels of poverty, deep inequality. You can't govern as a centrist very easily that way. And so I think they would, even if they were to win, they would find the economic circumstances would impose themselves on them, and the left would get chances again.
That makes perfect sense. All right, Ronan Burtenshaw, really appreciate your time. As always, everybody go subscribe to Tribune. You can read great columnists there, including, of course, Ronan himself, and also Grace Blakely, who's been on the shows. Definitely someone to follow as well. Ronan, really appreciate your time, brother. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.